Child and Adolescent welcomes you to another great episode of our Health, Hope, and Happiness podcast brought to you by Stipple. On today's segment of Ask Dr. Steve, Dr. Steve Graef, owner of Mindurance, an organization that has one-on-one online mental health coaching to help coaches and athletes manage their stress and enhance their performance. Today, we're going to talk about sportsmanship, Steve, and this is going to be another very interesting topic, I think, as many of the behaviors we see from coaches, athletes, and even fans, may be modeled by what we're seeing or experiencing when we're watching a professional or collegiate game. Emotions, as you know, and we'll talk about it, are often stirred up, and in the heat of the moment, behaviors are exhibited that may not come out when calmer circumstances are there. And as usual, we'll take a look at the different perspectives from a coach, a parent, even the athlete's point of view. I often think back before these segments when I used to coach youth sports, particularly with this one, sportsmanship was top priority, I think, at that age. You're trying to teach the kids about fairness, respect for one's opponent, be gracious in winning or losing. But we all know as we move up the chain to high school and college, stakes are higher, emotions are more intense. So I'm going to ask you the leadoff question. Did you ever participate in a game where you felt maybe there was a lack of sportsmanship shown by a coach or a fellow teammate? Or even an opponent?
Nothing actually stands out in my main recollection. I mean, there was definitely rivals that we had where things would get a little bit chippy. But at the end of the day, a lot of those games ended up being just really hard-fought battles that I think both teams ended up having kind of a mutual respect for one another. There were some teams that we played that had some interesting strategy that some might consider a bit lowbrow. I remember playing Ravenna, and they had this incredible running back by the name of Marcus Sanders, and he was keen to do like cutbacks. He was so fast, and he would go one direction and then completely change course to the other direction of the field. And so when he would do that, all of his offensive linemen would just be waiting, ready for us to turn around and start chasing him again. And there was many times where I just got completely clocked because I'm trying to track Marcus Sanders, and then boom, the offensive lineman is right there waiting for me. So, I mean, I guess it's not even lowbrow. It's just kind of the way that their thing works. But it was by no means ever kind of in poor sportsmanship. Thinking to Ohio State and some of the games that I watched on the sidelines, those were never situations of poor sportsmanship. But since I had graduated, certainly there has been some times, I think I recall some players like giving the middle finger and, people meeting in the middle of the 50-yard line or planting flags and stuff. You've seen some of that maybe in more recent Ohio State history, but I don't really recall any of that when I was actually on the team.
Yeah, and you were just ahead of the social media thing as well. So I think some of this stuff may have always happened, but it just gets magnified and blown up with everybody having a phone in the stands as well.
I think there's a lot of truth to that because as we think about sportsmanship, and this might be something we go back to quite frequently, is almost a continuum or notches of kind of positive sportsmanship where, you're deliberately helping somebody up or really going out of your way to shake somebody's hands or sharing vocally just accolades about the other team. And then there's kind of neutral sportsmanship, I guess, where you're not really causing a ruckus, but you're not really going above and beyond to show your appreciation for your opponent. So I think a lot of people can operate there. And then there's the negative sportsmanship where you're complaining about the refs, complaining about the other team, or you're actually getting into an altercation, physical altercation, yelling matches with other athletes, coaches, or parents. And if you think about this kind of positive, neutral, negative continuum or notches, there is probably a bit of a upstream influence of stressors, demands, maybe physical fatigue, burnout, overwhelm, emotion, personality style, that all kind of flows into this black box of sportsmanship. And then if you put an individual in a particular situation with all of these effects coming downstream, that could pop somebody into, more negative sportsmanship, or if they have great emotional regulation abilities, they may stay more neutral. Or if they have very, very solid emotional regulation abilities, they may actually still be able to remain positive in that competitive environment. So I'm sure as we talk through this podcast, we'll be able to explore some of these more upstream effects and how they may affect the black box of sportsmanship.
So picking up on the athlete and sportsmanship, when I played sports as a young kid and then I tried to instill it in my child, you always want to, as we talked earlier, shake hands with the opponent after the game, tip your cap, pull them up if player gets knocked down, etc. So as we jump into this a little bit, for many of our athletes, the intensity of the game can still lead to many sportsmanship-like moments, such as I just said, picking up an opposing player up off the field or court, giving a player a fist bump or tapping them on the back, if they make a good play or after they've been injured. What messages do these acts of kindness actually set up for our younger athletes to follow?
I think it's tremendous, because it shows gratitude for a hard-fought battle. And in life, there's going to be things that are hard. So the opponent might not be a human being, but the opponent is just the challenges and the obstacles that life inevitably throws at us. And so if you're able to shake the hand of an individual that's been trying to thwart our progress towards achieving something that we want, then we could theoretically shake the hand of the universe with those life obstacles that we encounter. And if we're able to shake our hands with those, then we become less paralyzed by them. We can roll with them. We can face them. We can overcome them with more gratitude, acceptance, appreciation, and ultimately more mental energy and emotional energy to be able to continue down the path. So I think the ability to do that is just a really foundational life skill that is imperative.
All right, we're going to talk a little bit about the opposite viewpoint. I know you mentioned you didn't see the game between LSU and South Carolina earlier, so I'm going to set it up a little bit for you, and then you can kind of talk in context what message may have went out there. So Louisiana State University's Clay J. Johnson intentionally fouled South Carolina's Malaysia Fulwiley, only to prevent her from getting a breakaway layup, which sometimes often happens in a basketball game. Then Johnson shoved South Carolina's Ashlyn Watkins and was subsequently herself shoved to the ground by the Gamecocks player Cardosa. This resulted in both benches erupting, as you can imagine. So this type of behavior sometimes gets played out at all levels in all sports. It was the SEC final, so it's on ESPN, which then means it's magnified over social media, followed up on the news the next day. Emotions do play a part in a game, but what message may this have sent to younger athletes as well?
Yeah, I mean, the message is that this is a thing that happens, and that in some ways, I don't want to say it's appropriate, but that it's an option. That this is an option to behave this way. And not only is it an option to behave this way, but some people are going to reinforce and celebrate that option, and others are going to ridicule it and feel that it is inappropriate. And so regardless of how that all shakes out, young athletes are witnessing that behavior. And so now they know it is in the frame of possibility that somebody can achieve or engage in that. But what's good is that those are rare circumstances. Think about all the minutes of all the games that are broadcasted and that are played over the course of the United States and beyond. The large majority of games do not end up in a push or benches clearing, etc. That's what ESPN ultimately shows. That's the headline. That's what you may see on TikTok. So that may get reinforced, but I think by and large, athletes are still doing a pretty good job of keeping their cool.
And those also become teachable moments for coaches and parents as well with their athletes.
Absolutely. And I think you bring up a great point, is not to just let it pass by, but use it as a teachable. Use it. How's this make you feel? Could you see yourself ever doing that? Why or why not? Why do you think she did that? Why do you think she made that foul? Why do you think that person came off the bench and shoved the person to the ground? So there really is an opportunity to help young athletes of old digest that situation and think about what does it mean for them and how they show up on the fields of life.
Yeah, so that example just reinforced what we've kind of been talking about all along, that emotions do play a role during a contest. And today, some athletes are struggling to manage those emotions during a game, and sportsmanship may go by the wayside. So if an athlete is struggling with their game day emotions, players know each other better today through social media and these travel leagues. There's a lot more trash talking, as we've talked about in previous podcasts. How do athletes learn to control those emotions, still maintain that decorum and the sportsmanship we've been talking about?
Yeah, well, it takes tremendous emotional regulation, doesn't it? Even hearing you talk about it, I found myself getting stressed and worked up. So an athlete that's in this pressure cooker, it's a challenge. It's the game beyond the game. Playing the game is hard enough, but then there's all these additional pressures and demands associated with modern sport. Now, in some ways, it's great. I think people love looking on Huddle and seeing where their rankings are at, or what college coaches has peaked at their profile, or the fact that they could gain Instagram followers from their performance on the court, and some of that additional notoriety beyond just the neighborhood diner that they might get, which is what I had, back in my day,
Right.
the cheaper meal. Now it's a much larger kind of benefit associated with some of these things. But with that comes the less positive side, or the more challenging side. And so I think athletes really have a prime opportunity to recognize being a modern athlete is no longer simply about being big, fast, strong, flexible, endurance, etc. You need to also have emotional intelligence and mental stress regulation in order to be a successful athlete for the long term. Because if you do not have that, and you're trying to operate in this pressure cooker, that whether that is club volleyball, even at the middle school level, trying to get recruited into the collegiates in high school, or in college, navigating this whole NIL type of thing, or of course the pros, where there's just massive amounts of money and contracts being thrown around, the game becomes the easy part. The hard part is navigating all the pressures and the external circumstances that you have to face in addition.
So we're going to come out with another statistics. I've got a lot of them today. So
bring on the numbers.
Yeah, sportsmanship should be second nature if it's learned at a young age. But a recent survey indicated 55% of coaches have witnessed parents yelling abusively at their kid from the sidelines, and 40% have inserted themselves on the sidelines as coaches. What effect does this have on an athlete, and how does that affect how they may view sportsmanship?
Yeah, I mean, my first answer is how annoying. Like how annoying is it seeing, mom or dad scream at the top of their lungs to coach or a referee, and then for them to insert themselves on the sidelines? Like, I'd be appalled. Like, I was happy my parents came and watched me, but I would be appalled if they behaved that way. And so it's just interesting for the parent out there. I know this is an athlete section, but for the parents out there that might be listening, I'm assuming they probably are, it'd take a special athlete to listen to these things, though they should. But I imagine it's more likely a parent that's taking this in. Like, chill out. Like, what? Chill out. Imagine the shoe is flipped. Imagine you're the athlete now, and imagine your parents, right? The baby boomer plus parents acting that way at your dance recital or at your sporting event or at your music recital or whatever. Just think about how appalled you would be at that behavior. So yeah, my initial response is annoyed. I get that emotions run high, but let's not forget what's going on here. Okay, this is a game that was invented a long time ago that people still play and get accolades and notoriety for, that teaches life skills and keeps people physically active and teaches cooperation and competition. Your child's success in a sport is not the only way to achieve success in life. It's not the only way to accomplish good relationships in life. So it is just really an opportunity for us to, though we're in the pressure cooker of modern sport, you do not have to fall prey to it. All right. You can handle it from an objective stance and be in it without getting swept up in it. And I think it's important to at least consider that. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy. Doesn't mean it's going to be perfect. You may throw off some off-color remarks to a coach or to an athlete or say something to another parent. But really, try to think through that intentionality and be proactive. Is this really in the best service of myself, my athlete, the team, and the local community?
So as we mentioned before, everything kind of happens in real time today. Parents, I know myself, we used to tape my son and our daughter doing their flips and their hoops and their football, mainly because they like to go back and watch it. But then we also posted some of it on social media. So one time, if an athlete had a bad moment, as we mentioned before, few people knew about it. Today, everybody knows about it. Do you feel sportsmanship is really in decline, or these are just few incidences that, as we mentioned a little earlier, get a little bit more magnified and blown up?
Maybe both. I certainly think that these instances have the opportunity to get more magnified and blown up. And I think, speaking to the introduction, because modern sport has a lot of additional pressures associated with it, I think you have the otherwise neutral, level-headed athlete that has there exists now a greater possibility that level-headed athlete could spike into a less sportsmanship-like behavior because of the added pressures. So I think this pressure cooker is just kind of pushing that piston higher to that surface level to a greater degree. And whereas in the past, maybe lesser people would have the opportunity to blow because the pressure wasn't as high. But now, because the pressure is so high, I think it's pushing even level-headed people onto the verge of possible explosion. So yes, I think there's the reality is these situations are more exposed, yes, and the overall there's still a lot more positive sportsmanship than negative sportsmanship. It's not like every single game ends in a fight, but there are probably, I would imagine, more instances of this feisty, poor sportsmanship like behavior because of the pressure cooker that we're in these days.
So provide for our listeners a good outline for an athlete to maintain good sportsmanship.
Yeah, well, first off, again, we talked about the black box of sportsmanship. Then there's positive sportsmanship, negative sportsmanship, and just kind of neutral. And then the athlete has an opportunity to reflect on those upstream impacts. How is my overall stress level? How are things academically, socially, home life, financially? All of these things are going to impact our psychological, mental, emotional, physical fuel tank. And so if our fuel tank's really high because the upstream effects aren't negatively impactful to us, then when we get to the black box of sportsmanship and something doesn't go well, we have a lot of energy and fuel to be able to manage that and maintain our level-headedness. But if we're constantly thinking about the pressure that we're under, school's giving us problem, we're having issues with teammates, our own coach is problematic, those types of things are going to lower the fuel that's available to us to manage ourselves. So then if we find ourselves in the black box of sportsmanship and something happens, it's going to increase the likelihood that maybe we don't respond in the way that we would prefer. So I think just being aware of our stress level, how much fuel we have in the mental, physical, psychological, emotional fuel tank, and engaging in good coping resources to manage that stress. That way, when you get into the challenging reality of competition, you're much greater able to roll with the ups and downs of that versus being completely rattled and overthrown by them.
All right, as we wrap it up, is there anything else you want to add on this particular segment for the athletes?
No, I think, again, just be intentional. Recognize the game within the game, that participating in athletics, unfortunately, is no longer just about participating in sport. There's other external things that are now involved that one must also be somewhat equipped to be able to handle in order to do the on-court stuff well as well.
As always, Dr. Steve, we appreciate your insights, your advice on all these topics. And as to our listeners, we always appreciate you listening to the Health, Hope, and Happiness podcast brought to you by Stifel. Until the next time, we look forward to talking with Dr. Steve. Have a great day.
We'll see y'all.